If you feel like you understand yourself more than ever, but your life still doesn't actually change, this video will explain why, and why almost nothing you've tried has worked. There's a quiet frustration many people reach after years of self-work. They've reflected deeply, noticed their habits, and can explain their behavior with impressive clarity. They know why they react the way they do. They know where it came from. They even know what they should be doing differently. And yet, despite all that understanding, their inner life feels strangely familiar. The same thoughts return, the same emotions rise. The same situations seem to repeat, just with slightly different details. At some point, understanding stops feeling empowering and starts feeling confusing. What's happening here isn't a failure of intelligence or effort. It's the nature of how the mind forms patterns. The mind doesn't operate primarily through logic or insight. It operates through repetition. When a thought appears and triggers discomfort, the mind reacts automatically, trying to fix it, escape it, explain it, or improve itself. That reaction feels helpful in the moment, but over time, it becomes familiar, and familiarity quietly turns into a loop. The loop isn't the thought itself. It's the reaction that follows it. Eventually, the mind begins reacting not just to life, but to its own internal activity. A thought appears. An emotion follows. Then a second layer appears. Commentary, judgment, strategy. That second layer is where most people spend their energy, trying to manage what's already happening. But this management is the pattern. And the more important it feels to fix it, the more the mind reinforces it. This is why insight often increases awareness, but doesn't reduce repetition. From the inside, this feels deeply personal. It feels like you're missing something obvious. You might think you're not disciplined enough, not spiritual enough, or not applying what you know correctly. But the issue isn't a lack of application. It's the assumption that awareness is meant to do something. That assumption quietly keeps the loop alive. If effort, insight, and motivation were enough, this wouldn't be happening. In the next part, we'll look at why the most common solutions, including awareness itself, often fail to create real change. If effort, insight, or motivation were enough, this pattern would have stopped by now. So the question isn't why you haven't tried hard enough. The question is, why the things that usually work don't work here. Motivation is designed for action, not inner change. It's useful when something needs to be done in the external world. But when it's turned inward, motivation becomes pressure. And pressure always implies that something is wrong. The mind interprets that pressure as a threat. So instead of relaxing, it tightens. That tightening doesn't dissolve the pattern. It strengthens it. If motivation worked on inner patterns, burnout wouldn't be so common among self-improvers. Discipline relies on control. It assumes there is a part of you that needs to be corrected. At first, this feels empowering. You feel structured, focused, and in charge. But over time, discipline creates an internal split. One part of you watches, corrects, and monitors another. That internal surveillance keeps attention locked on the pattern, and attention is the fuel it needs. What you monitor constantly rarely loosens on its own. Awareness is often introduced as the solution, but it's usually misunderstood. Most people don't observe their thoughts neutrally. They observe them with an agenda. They watch in order to change. They notice in order to fix. This turns awareness into another form of control, just a quieter one. Awareness doesn't fail. Control disguised as awareness does. Positive thinking attempts to replace unwanted experience with a preferred version. For a moment, this can feel relieving. The mind feels lighter, more optimistic. But underneath, the original pattern hasn't disappeared. It's only been covered. Eventually, it returns, often stronger, because it was never allowed to complete itself. Anything you suppress internally comes back demanding attention. All these approaches share the same mistake. They treat the pattern as something that must be removed. But patterns aren't removed. They dissolve when they're no longer needed. And that only happens when the reaction to them stops. This is the part that feels counterintuitive. Change doesn't come from doing something to the pattern. It comes from seeing how the reaction keeps it alive. In the next part, we'll look at what awareness actually is, and why it often feels like nothing is happening when it starts working. At some point, most people reach a confusing conclusion. They've stopped forcing themselves as much, they're trying to be aware, and yet nothing seems to change. This is usually where doubt sets in. It feels like awareness is passive, ineffective, or incomplete. But what's actually happening here is subtle, and it's almost never explained clearly. Awareness is not a technique. It's not a practice designed to produce an outcome. And it's not a mental stance that says, "I'm watching this so it will go away." The moment awareness is used as a tool, it stops being awareness. It becomes another form of interference. The quieter awareness becomes, the harder it is for the mind to trust it. The mind is conditioned to associate change with effort. When effort drops, the mind assumes nothing is happening. But awareness doesn't work by creating immediate relief. It works by interrupting the automatic reaction. At first, this interruption feels like emptiness. There's no rush, no reward, no sense of progress. And the mind, used to movement, interprets that stillness as failure. Most people mistake the absence of control for the absence of change. Here's the part that's rarely mentioned. When a pattern isn't reacted to, it doesn't stop instantly. It continues for a while, out of habit. This delay creates confusion. You're aware, but the pattern still appears. So the mind concludes that awareness isn't working and returns to fixing, managing, or suppressing. That return is what resets the loop. The pattern doesn't need to be ended. It needs to be outlasted. Even when nothing seems different on the surface, something important is happening underneath. The pattern is no longer being rewarded with urgency. It's no longer being treated as a problem that needs solving. Without that reinforcement, it begins to weaken. Not dramatically, quietly. The mind starts to lose interest. Patterns persist through importance, not through strength. As the pattern weakens, there's often a strange in-between phase. You might feel less identified, but not yet free. The old reactions don't fully convince you anymore, but they haven't disappeared either. This can feel disorienting. Like something familiar is fading, but nothing new has replaced it. This is not regression. It's transition. By this point, something may already feel different. Not because a solution has been given, but because the struggle to solve may feel quieter. That quietness is important. It's the space where patterns begin to lose their grip. Patterns don't end through force. They end when they no longer serve a function. As long as a pattern believes it's protecting you, guiding you, or improving you, it continues. But when awareness no longer reacts with urgency, the pattern receives no instruction to continue. It isn't opposed. It isn't encouraged. It's simply seen. What isn't obeyed internally eventually stops commanding attention. Movies and stories teach us to expect transformation to feel dramatic, a moment of release, a clear before and after. Real inner change is quieter than that. It feels more like subtraction than achievement, less inner commentary, less emotional friction, less need to interfere. If change feels ordinary, it's probably real. When a pattern dissolves, nothing rushes in to replace it. There's no new identity, belief, or strategy. There's just more space. That space isn't empty in a negative way. It's responsive instead of reactive. Life still happens. Thoughts still appear, but they no longer dictate behavior automatically. Freedom isn't the absence of thought. It's the absence of compulsion. Even after awareness is established, patterns may still arise. This doesn't mean anything has gone wrong. It simply means the nervous system is completing old momentum. What matters is that repetition can no longer operate unseen. It appears, but it doesn't take over. And because it's no longer believed, it no longer organizes your life around itself. What's fully seen can't run your life quietly anymore. The mind repeats patterns until it realizes they're no longer being followed, not resisted, not controlled, not analyzed, just seen. And once that happens, change doesn't arrive as a dramatic event. It arrives as the end of unnecessary effort.